Good evening. This is Quintus Curtius, and welcome back to the podcast. It's been a number of weeks since our last podcast, so we can try to get caught up on a few things here and cover some new ground, cover some new subjects. And the subject of this podcast is going to be some life advice by the political philosopher Ibn Zafar Al-Siqilli. Ibn Zafar Al-Siqilli, he's an Arabic man of letters and political theorist who lived in Sicily and the Middle East during the Middle Ages. And he wrote a very famous, or in some quarters, famous book of political philosophy. And as you know, I like to do podcasts and write articles about forgotten thinkers, explorers, travelers, men of letters. I just think that it's important to keep alive the spirit of some of these forgotten, important notables, and this certainly is one of those guys. He's often been described as the precursor to Machiavelli. In my opinion, I think he's just as good, if not better, than Machiavelli in terms of his maturity of thought, his profundity of his advice, and I think also the expansiveness of his vision. So that's what I wanted to do. And we're not going to be able to do a complete discussion of his thought because that would take hours. And I've already written a number of articles about Ibn Zafar. And you can find those if you go to my website, qcurtius.com. And if you go to the search box and just type in Ibn Zafar, Z-A-F-A-R, IBN space Z-A-F-A-R, then you can find those articles. But I wanted to keep this podcast focused on just practical life advice. And I got the idea to do this because every now and then I get emails from people or messages from younger guys asking advice about this, advice about that. And that's fine. I really enjoy getting those emails. I like getting them. And just in general, I really like talking to younger people. I like talking to younger men and women because they have a certain innocence that I find appealing in many ways. They have a certain, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but a certain eagerness and a certain earnestness about them that, if you've been around a while, you appreciate more because they remind you of what you were like when you were at that age. And there's two real features that I notice about younger guys, younger men especially, and women also, but women tend to mature earlier than men, so you don't really get a lot of this same feeling with women. But what I think is very endearing about the younger guys is they seem to share certain traits, and this is not a criticism at all. I'm not saying this to criticize them. In fact, it's a positive thing I'm trying to just convey. And the first thing that I notice often is that many of them they're very concerned about what other people think. Younger guys are always worried. You'll get an email like, "Hey, am I looking alpha enough, or am I doing this the right way, or I'm afraid I'm going to look like a dork if I do this or do that." They're all up in their own head. They're all up in their own mind, worried about what someone is going to think, or what are they doing this the right way, or there's a lot of overthinking going on with younger guys, and I find that kind of endearing in many ways because I read that and I say, wow, I remember when I used to be like that. And I try to just say, look, man, you're doing the right thing. Just keep on the path with what you're doing. Don't try to be somebody else that you're not. Just focus on the basics. Focus on the basics. Keep doing what you're doing. And things will work out, and you'll adjust. You'll change course, direction, and make adjustments as needed as time goes by. And the other thing that I like about the younger guys is they always whenever they have a problem, it's always what I call a generalized malaise question. Often you won't get a specific question. There'll be like a sort of a vague I'm feeling really bad at work, and what do I do? Or I feel like a dork here. What do I do? It's rarely a specific question that involves actionable advice or answers. It's just sort of a generalized feeling of malaise. And when I read those questions, I'm also overcome with a feeling of sympathy and a feeling of, maybe nostalgia, because I know what they're getting at. When a younger guy says that, he doesn't really want, he wants to reach out to somebody. He wants someone to talk to. He wants someone to listen to him. The younger guys, they just want someone to kind of hear them out. They just want someone to listen to them. They want someone to be there to just tell them it's going to be all right. And they just want that reassurance. And that's what I know I can detect. And that's really what they need. And I try to provide that. Again, it's an art, because also there's certain people that you have to kind of kick in the ass and get them moving. And sometimes that has its uses as well. But anyway, I just thought I would mention that about some of the endearing qualities of the younger questioners. So anyway, it's not a criticism. In fact, it's just the opposite. I'm saying it as a way of appreciating it. All right. So let's move on here. Let's talk about now the life advice of Ibn Zafar Al-Siqilli. And I'm not going to really, I did not know anything about this philosopher up until about a year and a half ago. I did not know anything about him. I had never heard of him. And I came across him in my reading. And this is one of the great things about reading, is eventually you'll stumble across some hidden gem. And I found out about this writer, and it just so happened that a very, very, very good translation was done of his work, an annotated translation with a lot of the types of extras that I like. And you can find it on Amazon. And the translation was done by two gentlemen who spent time in the Middle East, whose Arabic is obviously very, very good. They look like two Armenian last names, Kachikian, Joseph A. Kachikian, and R. Dekmejian. And they did a very, very good job on this text, this old text, and I can't recommend it highly enough. If you feel so inclined, I would recommend buying it, and I'll even put a link if you feel like it in this. There's links to the book on my other articles about Ibn Zafar, but it's recommended, especially if you're interested in political philosophy or just philosophy in general, or just like good books. And, one of the things that I love about discovering these old writers is that there's always great things in there. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Ibn Zafar's background, but he was born in Sicily, because in those days, his lifespan was from 1104 to 1170. And he was born in Sicily, which in those days was a province of the... It was an Islamic territory back then, and it was fully under the control of a local ruler whose name I'm not sure of. I can look it up, but I don't happen to know it offhand. And he also moved around and lived in different parts of the Middle East. But he wrote. He was a court favorite. He did interact with political leaders, and this formed the basis for his treatise on political thought, which was actually titled. And one of the things, I'll just say this. One of the things I just really, really love about medieval Arabic prose, or just traditional Arabic writing in general, is the titles in those days. The titles of books always were done with rhyming prose. You'll even not only was the poetry in Arabic rhyming, but the prose also rhymed, and it was considered part of a writer's art to come up with a title that rhymed. The title itself rhymed. It's just beautiful. I mean, the title of his book was called Salwan al-Muta' fi Adwan al-Atba'. And I'll repeat that. Salwan al-Muta' fi Adwan al-Atba'. And as you can see in Arabic, it's very, very nice. It's balanced. It rhymes. you can't really translate a lot of these titles into literal English because they won't make any sense. But a good translation for that title would be something like "Consolation for the ruler amid the hostility of his subjects," or a way for the ruler to handle situations when he's confronted with hostility. And other great works of Arabic literature also had rhyming prose. There's one of the best examples. I mean, they all rhymed, but one of the best examples is the travel memoirs of Ibn Battuta, who was a North African traveler who traveled all over the Middle East and Asia. And the title of his work was Tuhfa al-Nidhar fi Gharaib al-Amsar wa Ajaib al-Asfar. And I'll repeat that again. Tuhfa al-Nidhar fi Gharaib al-Amsar wa Ajaib al-Asfar. And it's very difficult to translate that, but it's basically like a masterpiece, for wonders, for people who want to travel to wondrous states. It's just not an easy sentence to an easy title to translate. But the point is that the titles of these old works were just beautiful, and a lot of times you just can't really convey those in English, effectively. And this is one of the reasons why Ibn Battuta's book is just simply, the title is simply shortened to just Travels. Rihlati Ibn Battuta, the Travels of Ibn Battuta. And the full real title is just not, it just sounds so clumsy in English that people just don't really bother with it. And that's just, I think, a perfect example of how sometimes languages, you just trying to aim for a literal, mechanical, one-for-one translation is just not the way to go. You have to sort of reinvent it or reinterpret it in a way that makes sense in the target language. But anyway, let's talk about some of the life advice of Ibn Zafar. And I'll read this to you. And this is in the section on patience. He talks about patience. He says, "Attend to one who offers you advice. If the advice he gives would injure others without serving you, then conclude that he is a villain. If it injures others, but is beneficial to you, then conclude that he is an ambitious man. But if it is beneficial to you and hurts no one, then listen to the counselor and trust him." So this is his criterion for what to do when you're offered advice. Because this is it just occurred to me that we often don't really have a reliable way of testing whether other people's advice is good or not. And there's many ways to test that. I think you can use your own judgment on that. But this is a good way I found. And I'll repeat that. So he says, "Attend to one who offers you advice. If the advice he gives would injure others without serving you, then conclude that he is a villain." In other words, if the advice he gives would hurt other people and does you no good, then conclude that the person giving you the advice is a bad man. But if the advice injures others, but is beneficial to you, then conclude that he is an ambitious man. And I think what he means by that is this is someone who's trying to flatter you and trying to offer you advice that's good for the short term. But if the advice is beneficial to you and hurts no one, then listen to the counselor and trust him. So in other words, the criterion of good advice, it should not only help you, but it should not act in a way that it antagonizes or unnecessarily harms other people. Because having a lot of enemies out there in the world is no way to go through life, believe me. Is no way to go through life. And this is one of the things that Machiavelli, I think, really missed the boat on. This idea that you can act like you can just do whatever you want and act in a way that pays no mind to what other people are the fallout that other people are going to experience from it. And that's just not the way to go. I just think that's, the older I get, I think that advice is not good advice. Unnecessarily antagonizing people is not the way to go. And anyone who thinks otherwise, I think is, in my view, is lacking some practical, real-world experience. So think about that piece of advice. That's the first one. The other piece of advice that I like that he gives, and I'll read this to you. Again, it's in his section on patience. He says, "The philosophers have likewise said, it is the king's duty to ensure 5 things for himself. First, a faithful counselor, from whom advice he may seek assistance in good as well as in adverse fortune. Second is a sharp sword, to defend himself against his enemies. Third is a stallion, whose speed he may rely upon when further resistance is impossible. Fourth is a beautiful woman, whose love may preserve him both in thought and deed. And fifth is an impregnable fortress, in which to take refuge when surrounded by an enemy." So this is Ibn Zafar's counsel on the 5 things that a king may need. And again, the book is filled with, this is just one of many, many, many pieces of advice. So this is not all he says, but this is just one of the things that jumped out at me as something that might be worth hearing. And I'll repeat that. Basically, it's first, you need a faithful counselor who can give you advice in good times as well as bad. Second, a sharp sword. We can interpret that modernly as a good weapon to defend yourself against your enemies. Third is a stallion, whose speed he may rely upon when further resistance is impossible. In other words, you better have a way to get out of Dodge. If things go south and if shit goes south, you better find a way to get out of Dodge. And that's really what he's saying, is you always have a backup plan. Have plan B, because no matter how good your plans are, things do not always cooperate the way you want them to. Fourth is a beautiful woman. Okay, we cannot neglect the benefits of love. A good man cannot neglect the benefits of love. And this is something that's totally lacking in Machiavelli. Totally lacking. Who himself, I think, was arguably a very cold and distant man. And the fifth thing is an impregnable fortress. An impregnable fortress. You better have your redoubt. You better have your redoubt to which you can repair yourself in times of need or take refuge in when you need to. All right, let's move on to more advice here from Ibn Zafar. And here's one where he says, it was said, and it's funny in these translations, it was said, in Arabic it's always like qala, like it'll be qala, like it is said, or he said. And okay, I'm just going to read the quote here. He says, "If you so much as bestow a glance on your enemy, you lose your advantage. And if you listen to his words, you submit yourself to him." It was said, or he said, "By demonstrating friendly approval to the enemy, you expose yourself to the risk of being submerged in his world and falling into his schemes." It was said, "When a man bows to listen to his enemy, what good does it do if he obtains nothing in exchange?" It was said, "He who cannot resist the temptation to gossip with the enemy is incapable of guarding himself against its stratagems." And boy, isn't that ever true? And here's some very wise information about subjects, about a ruler's subjects. Okay, and listen to this. He says, "It was said, subjects first shake their tongues and then their fists. Rulers cannot control their tongues unless they master their whole bodies, nor will sovereigns remain in power unless they can win the hearts of the masses. But these hearts will never cleave to a sovereign if he does not administer justice impartially, applying similar measures to high and low, lighten taxes on provisions and labor, and exempt his subjects from excessive taxation. These 3 causes are in fact those that generate hatred among the upper classes and propel the lower ones to long more ardently to rise to their level. There are 3 kinds of subjects: The first are worthy individuals who are faithful and who recognize the superiority of the ruler. They acknowledge the importance of the care that is devoted to him and feel the burden of his responsibilities. Their affection towards the ruler may be recognized by their graciousness and courtesy. The second group includes good and bad individuals who must, therefore, be held in check by a combination of gentleness and severity. The third is the populace that always supports those who advocate causes without questioning either their words or actions. They side without knowing friend from foe. They must be governed through fear, without harsh treatment, and tough punishment without excessive rigor. So these are the classes, the different classes of subjects. And I think that these little comments here really show Ibn Zafar at his best, as in terms of his knowledge of human psychology and of what really matters in the real world. And lastly, before we close out, I think I'll emphasize one last thing that comes through in the Solwan, in Ibn Zafar's work, which is the necessity of patience, the real necessity of patience. You have to play the long game. You really do have to play the long game in life, because there are going to be ups, there are going to be downs, there are going to be in-betweens, and you have to be able to roll with the punches in life, because you're going to get a lot of them, believe me. Believe me. And on patience, one of his best comments is this. He says, "Man's fate is in accordance with his worth. A man may be known by his patience in enduring calamities that befall him. He has little to hope for from fortune who has little patience to support him." I'll repeat that last sentence. He has little to hope for from fortune who has little patience to support him. What that means is the person who does not have much patience cannot expect much good fortune. That's what that means. So patience, patience, patience. It's such a critical quality. And, I don't think, what's interesting is I think there are cultural differences that reading works from different cultures, like reading works from Arabic literature, Chinese literature, Indian literature. They emphasize different things than the Western tradition did. I mean, believe me, obviously I'm by inclination and by my writings, my translations, I'm a Western classical translator of the Latin classics. But at the same time, we cannot close our eyes to the traditions of other parts of the world, which have also their own special qualities. And it's the Romans and the Greeks in many ways did not emphasize as much of these quote-unquote Asian qualities like patience, rolling with the punches, things like that, as the Western philosophers did. And some can argue that this is a source of strength, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. But there is also some value in that Arabic or Chinese quality of patience, of playing the long game. You've got to be in it for the long game. So anyway, that was my little extract here of life advice from Ibn Zafar Al-Siqilli, the Sicilian. And I hope you will take that to heart, take that to heed. And until next time, I'm Quintus Curtius. Good night.